The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the paper-thin walls of Elena's studio apartment at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before it was supposed to ring. She'd been awake anyway, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a bird in flight, if you squinted and believed in better things. Her fingers found the crumpled eviction notice on the nightstand, the red final stamped across the top like a wound that wouldn't heal. 30 days. She had 30 days to find $3,200 for back rent, or she'd be sleeping in her 10-year-old Honda again. Elena's bare feet hit the cold linoleum as she moved through her morning ritual. Instant coffee with no sugar, yesterday's bread toasted until the mold spots disappeared, and a prayer whispered to her grandmother's rosary hanging by the mirror. The same mirror that showed her hollow cheeks and eyes that had forgotten how to hope. "Another day in paradise," she whispered, her voice hoarse from tears she'd cried too quietly for the neighbors to hear. Ready for the complete story? Smash that subscribe button and tell me where you are tuning in from in the comments. Tomorrow brings another mind-blowing story that's just as unbelievable. Trust me, you will want to be here for it. Alright, let's jump into it. The bus ride to the Freeman estate took 43 minutes, each stop carrying maids, gardeners, and drivers who served the wealthy while living paycheck to paycheck. Elena pressed her face against the window, watching the landscape transform from cracked sidewalks to manicured lawns that cost more to maintain than she made in a year. The Freeman mansion rose from the hillside like something from another world, all marble columns and gleaming windows that reflected the morning sun like diamonds. Elena clutched her cleaning supplies tighter, the plastic handles cutting into her palms. This job paid double what she'd made at the hotel, enough to save her apartment and maybe, just maybe, let her breathe again. Mrs. Holbrook, the head housekeeper, met her at the servants' entrance with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "You must be Elena. Remember, you're invisible unless spoken to. The master values his privacy above all else." Meanwhile, 30 feet above in the mansion's east wing, Adrian Freeman stood at his bedroom window, watching the new maid disappear into his house. At 34, he'd built an empire that spanned 3 continents, but the fever ravaging his body made him feel ancient and fragile. The doctors called it a rare autoimmune condition, his own body turning against him in waves of burning heat and bone-deep exhaustion. What they didn't say, but he knew, was that stress had triggered it. The stress of living like a machine, of trusting no one, of building walls so high that even he couldn't see over them anymore. His hand shook as he reached for his medication, the pills rattling in their bottles like dice in a game he was losing. 3 months of this illness, and he'd driven away 2 nurses and 4 housekeepers. They all looked at him the same way eventually, like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be cared for. Adrian's reflection in the window showed a stranger. Hollow cheeks where there used to be strength, grey pallor where there used to be the tan of someone who sailed and played tennis at the country club. His dark hair, usually perfectly styled, hung limp against his forehead. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Freeman? Your breakfast is ready." He didn't answer. Food had lost all taste, and eating required energy he didn't possess. Instead, he moved to his massive bed, a California king that made him feel even more alone, and tried to remember what it felt like before every breath was a conscious effort. The fever would come again tonight. It always did, turning his skin to fire and his mind to fragments of memories he'd rather forget. His mother's funeral when he was 12. His father's cold handshake when Adrian had made his first million. The woman who'd left him last year, whispering that loving him was like trying to hug a glacier. Maybe she was right. Maybe this illness was just his body finally matching his heart, frozen and untouchable. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Freeman? I'm Elena, the new maid. Mrs. Holbrook asked me to check if you needed anything. Her voice was different from the others, gentler, with a slight accent that sounded like home, even though he'd never had one. He almost answered, almost called out that yes, he needed something, though he couldn't name what. Instead, silence. Always silence. Through the door, he heard her footsteps pause, then continue down the hall. But something in that pause, a moment of genuine concern rather than mere duty, stirred something in his chest he'd thought was dead. Neither of them knew that by evening, everything would change. The fever came like a wildfire at 9:47 p.m. Elena was in the kitchen polishing silver when she heard the crash from upstairs, something heavy hitting the marble floor, followed by a sound that made her blood freeze. Not quite a scream, but close. The kind of sound a wounded animal makes when it thinks no one can hear. Mrs. Holbrook had left hours ago, along with the rest of the day staff. The mansion felt cavernous in the darkness, every shadow holding secrets Elena wasn't paid enough to know. Another crash. Then silence. Elena climbed the servants' stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. The hallway to the master bedroom stretched before her like a tunnel, lit only by the moonlight streaming through tall windows. She'd never been allowed in this part of the house. The door was slightly ajar. "Mr. Freeman?" Her voice barely carried. "Sir, are you?" "Don't." His voice was raw, desperate. "Don't come in here." But she could see him through the crack in the door, and what she saw made her forget every rule Mrs. Holbrook had drilled into her. Adrian Freeman, the man who owned half the city, who made grown businessmen stutter, was curled on the bathroom floor in nothing but boxer shorts, his body convulsing with fever. The marble around him was wet from an overturned water glass, creating a dangerous slick that explained the crashes. His skin burned red in the moonlight, and sweat poured from him like he was melting from the inside out. "I said don't." He tried to push himself up, but his arms gave out. Elena stepped inside without permission, closing the door behind her. "You need help. I need you to leave." But even as he said it, his body betrayed him with another violent shiver. She knelt beside him, her uniform soaking up the spilled water. This close, she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, like standing near a furnace. His dark eyes, usually so controlled and distant, were glazed with fever and something else, fear. "When did you last take your medication?" she asked softly. I can't." His words slurred together. The fever was winning. Elena made a decision that would haunt and heal them both. "I'm going to help you cool down. That means getting you in the shower. Do you understand?" He nodded weakly, past the point of pride. She helped him stand, his weight suddenly against her shoulder, solid and burning and surprisingly human. The Adrian Freeman the world knew was all sharp suits and sharper words, but this man leaning on her was just flesh and bone and pain. The master bathroom was larger than her entire apartment, all marble and gold fixtures that probably cost more than she'd make in a lifetime. But Elena only saw what mattered. The walk-in shower with multiple heads, perfect for bringing down a dangerous fever. She turned on the water, testing the temperature with her hand until it was lukewarm. Cool enough to help, warm enough not to shock his system. The sound of water filled the silence between them, masking the sound of her own racing heartbeat. "I can't," he whispered, swaying on his feet. "I know." Her voice was steady even as her hands shook. "Let me." She guided him under the spray, and he gasped as the water hit his fevered skin. Steam rose around them like ghosts of all the barriers about to fall. Elena had seen naked men before. She'd been married once, had loved once. But this felt different. Sacred somehow. Like she was witnessing someone's soul stripped bare. "The soap," she murmured, reaching for the expensive bottle on the shelf. Her movements were clinical, professional, but her heart was breaking for the man who flinched every time the water touched a particularly sensitive spot. She soaked the washcloth with hands that barely trembled now. This was just care. Just one human being helping another survive. But when her cloth-covered hand touched his shoulder for the first time, everything changed. He went completely still. Not the stillness of fever, but something deeper. His eyes found hers through the steam and water, and for a moment, neither of them breathed. "I haven't." He started, then stopped. "Haven't what?" she whispered. "Haven't let anyone take care of me since I was 8 years old." The washcloth moved in slow, gentle circles across his shoulders and back. Elena could feel the tension in his muscles, the way his body held itself like armor even now. But gradually, impossibly, she felt him begin to relax under her touch. "My mother used to sing to me when I had fevers," she said softly, not sure why she was sharing this. "Silly songs about birds and flowers. What happened to her? Cancer. When I was 16. The washcloth dipped lower, washing away sweat and fear, and the accumulated weight of carrying the world alone. She taught me that healing happens in the touching. That sometimes the medicine isn't pills, it's just knowing someone sees you." Adrian's breathing had evened out, the fever finally breaking under the cool water and gentle care. But he made no move to take the washcloth from her, and she made no move to give it up. "I see you," she whispered, not sure if she meant to say it aloud. His hand found hers on the washcloth, covering her fingers with his. His skin was still warm, but no longer burning. His eyes were clearer now, focused entirely on her face. Elena. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. They stood there in the steam and spray, Maid and Millionaire, both of them trembling for entirely different reasons than when this began. Neither of them noticed that the fever had completely broken, or that the water had run cold, or that somewhere in the space between healing and being healed, two hearts had begun beating in the same rhythm. Elena's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She stood in the servants' bathroom at 2 a.m., scrubbing her skin raw with cheap soap that smelled nothing like the lavender luxury she'd used on him. The hot water couldn't wash away the memory of his eyes meeting hers, or the way her name had sounded like a benediction on his fevered lips. What have I done? She'd crossed every line Mrs. Holbrook had drawn, violated every boundary that kept the world in its proper order. Maids didn't touch their employers. They certainly didn't bathe them with the kind of tenderness reserved for what? Love. That was impossible. Insane. But her hands remembered the feel of his skin cooling under her touch, the way his breathing had steadied when she'd whispered about healing and being seen. Her heart remembered the moment his fingers had covered hers on the washcloth, gentle as a promise she didn't dare name. Elena caught her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. Her dark hair hung in damp strands around her face, and her uniform was still wet from kneeling beside him on that marble floor. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd forgotten her place and might pay dearly for it. The rational part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive through divorce and poverty and a dozen kinds of heartbreak, started building walls. It was just emergency care, medical necessity. She'd done what any decent human being would do, nothing more. By morning, everything would return to normal. It had to. But as she walked to her small room in the servants' quarters, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be normal again. 3 floors above, Adrian stood under his own shower for the second time that night, letting scalding water pound against his shoulders. The fever was gone, his strength slowly returning, but he felt more exposed than when he'd been naked and shivering on his bathroom floor. She saw me. Not Adrian Freeman, billionaire. Not the man who could buy and sell companies with a phone call. She'd seen him at his most vulnerable, weak, afraid, human, and she hadn't looked away, hadn't judged, hadn't tried to use it against him. The memory of her hands, so gentle yet sure, sent heat through his body that had nothing to do with fever. She'd touched him like he mattered, like he was worth saving, and for those few minutes under the spray, he'd felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. But hope was dangerous. Hope led to trust, and trust led to betrayal. He'd learned that lesson young and well, carved into his heart by every person who'd seen his wealth before his humanity. Adrian turned off the water and reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Mrs. Holbrook's number. His thumb hovered over the call button. One conversation, and Elena would be gone by morning. It would be kindest for both of them, a clean break before either of them forgot who they really were. But he remembered her voice whispering about healing in the touching, about her mother's silly songs. He remembered the way she'd said, "I see you," like it was both a gift and a revelation. His phone clattered onto the marble counter, the call unmade. By 6 a.m., Elena had convinced herself it was temporary insanity brought on by exhaustion and too much empathy. She moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision. Coffee, toast, prayer, each familiar action rebuilding the armor she'd let slip the night before. She would be professional today, invisible, as Mrs. Holbrook had instructed. What happened last night was an emergency, nothing more, and emergencies had their own rules. Today, the regular rules applied. The bus ride to the estate felt different somehow, as if the other domestic workers could smell the transgression on her. Elena kept her eyes down, counting stops and trying not to think about whether Adrian was awake yet, whether he was stronger, whether he remembered the way he'd said her name. Mrs. Holbrook was waiting at the servants' entrance with a face like thunder. Elena. The older woman's voice could have frozen hellfire. A word. They walked to the housekeeper's office in silence, passing other staff members who suddenly found their shoes fascinating. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as Mrs. Holbrook closed the door with ominous precision. "Mr. Freeman called this morning." Mrs. Holbrook's pale eyes were ice cold. "He mentioned you assisted him during a medical emergency last night." Elena's mouth went dry. "Yes, ma'am. He had a fever and you entered the master suite without permission. He was hurt. I heard him fall. You violated the most basic rule of service in this household." Mrs. Holbrook's voice rose to a harsh whisper. "We do not cross boundaries with our employers. Ever. For any reason." Heat flooded Elena's cheeks. "I did what anyone would do. He could have been seriously injured. What you did," Mrs. Holbrook said slowly, "was forget your place. And that, Miss Morales, is unforgivable." The older woman opened a manila folder on her desk, revealing Elena's employment contract. Red ink marked several violations, each one like a nail in her coffin. "However," Mrs. Holbrook continued, and Elena's heart leaped with desperate hope, "Mr. Freeman has requested that you remain on staff. Against my better judgment, you will continue in your position. But understand this. One more breach of protocol, one more moment of forgetting who you are and who he is, and you will be terminated immediately." Without reference. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. "The master suite is now off limits to you entirely. Other staff will handle that area." Mrs. Holbrook's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I trust we understand each other." "Yes, ma'am." But as Elena left the office, her hands were steady for the first time since last night. Adrian had protected her, kept her job when he could have had her fired with a single word. Maybe he remembered after all. Maybe what happened between them had mattered to him too. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The power went out at 3:17 p.m. during the worst storm Elena had ever seen. Lightning split the sky like God's own fury, while rain hammered the mansion's windows with enough force to rattle the ancient frames. Elena was polishing brass in the ground floor library when the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, leaving her in the grey half-darkness of the storm. The backup generator should have kicked in immediately. Mrs. Holbrook had mentioned it during orientation, a fail-safe for a house that ran on technology and climate control. But the silence stretched on, broken only by thunder that made the crystal chandelier tinkle like wind chimes. Emergency protocol was clear. All staff were to gather in the servants' hall during power outages. Elena gathered her supplies, moving carefully through the darkened corridors with only her phone's flashlight to guide her. But as she passed the grand staircase, she heard something that stopped her cold. A crash from upstairs. Then Adrian's voice, sharp with frustration. Damn it. Elena's feet moved before her mind could stop them. She knew she was breaking Mrs. Holbrook's direct order. The master suite was forbidden territory. But that sound, that tone of voice, carried more than annoyance. It carried fear. She climbed the stairs in darkness, her phone's light creating dancing shadows on the oil paintings that watched her ascent with disapproving eyes. The hallway was a tunnel of black velvet, and she could hear her own heartbeat over the storm's rage. Mr. Freeman? She knocked softly on the door she'd entered uninvited just days before. Are you all right? Silence. Then, Elena? His voice carried surprise and something else. Relief? What are you doing up here? I heard you fall. Are you hurt? A pause. The door's locked. Electronic lock. It won't open without power. Elena's blood chilled. She tried the handle, solid as stone. The mansion's high-tech security system had become a prison. How long has it been down? 20 minutes. Maybe more. His voice was closer now, probably right against the door. My medication. I need my evening dose, and it's downstairs in the refrigerated safe. Another electronic lock. The implications hit her like physical blows. His medication was temperature sensitive, stored in a climate-controlled safe that required power to access. Without it, the fever could return with vengeance, and he'd be trapped in a locked room with no way to call for help if his condition deteriorated. The backup generator failed. Lightning hit something. The maintenance crew can't get here until the storm passes. Adrian's voice carried the controlled tension of a man trying not to panic. Could be hours. Elena pressed her palm against the door, wishing she could touch him, reassure him somehow. We'll figure this out. We. The word held a weight of longing that made her chest ache. I'm not leaving you alone. Through the door, she heard him sink down, probably to the floor. Elena did the same, pressing her back against the solid wood. They sat separated by inches and impossible circumstances. Two people who'd already broken every rule, discovering they were about to break more. Tell me about the medication, Elena said. How long do you have before? 6 hours. Maybe 8 if I'm lucky. His voice was steadier now, as if her presence had given him something to anchor to. The fever comes back fast without the suppressants. And when it comes back, like the other night, worse. The episodes get more severe each time I miss a dose. Elena closed her eyes, thinking. What about windows? Fire escape. 3rd floor, 40-foot drop to marble terrace. No fire escape. This wing was built in 1892. A bitter laugh. My ancestors' idea of security has become my cage. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, the thunder was getting closer, each rumble shaking the mansion's bones. Elena could hear other staff members calling to each other from the lower floors, but she made no move to answer. Adrian needed someone here, and she was the only one who knew the full scope of the danger. Elena. His voice was softer now, almost vulnerable. You should go. You'll get in trouble if Mrs. Holbrook finds you here. Let me worry about Mrs. Holbrook. She could fire you. Some things matter more than jobs. The words slipped out before Elena could stop them, hanging in the air between them like a confession. Another pause. Then, that night, when you helped me, Adrian's voice carried a weight of unfinished thoughts. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Elena's heart skipped. Me neither. I wanted to find you, to thank you properly. But Mrs. Holbrook said you'd been reassigned, that you weren't supposed to work in this wing anymore. She thought it was best. Professional boundaries and all. And what do you think? The question hung between them, loaded with everything they couldn't say. Elena knew the safe answer. Agree that boundaries were important, that what happened was just emergency care between strangers. But sitting here in the dark with a storm raging and his life potentially at risk, safe answers felt like cowardice. I think, Elena said slowly, that sometimes the most important moments happen when we stop caring about what we're supposed to do and start caring about what we need to do. Through the door, she heard Adrian shift closer. What do we need to do now? Find a way to get you that medication. And Elena hesitated, then plunged forward. Find a way to say all the things we've been too scared to say out loud. Elena. Her name was a whisper, a prayer, a promise. I'm here, she whispered back. Whatever happens, you're not alone. Outside, lightning illuminated the world in stark black and white. But inside their shared darkness, something warm and fragile was beginning to bloom. Tell me something real. Adrian's voice drifted through the door like smoke, and Elena found herself leaning closer to the wood that separated them. They'd been sitting in the darkness for an hour now, the storm still raging outside, his medication still locked away in the powerless safe below. Real. Elena's laugh was soft and sad. What's real is that I'm probably going to lose this job, and I need it more than you could ever understand. Try me. Something in his tone, not demanding, just quietly patient, made her want to trust him with pieces of herself she'd kept locked away. Maybe it was the darkness, or the strange intimacy of talking through a barrier, but Elena found the words coming easier than they should have. I was married once, to a man named David who promised me the world and delivered me poverty instead. Her fingers traced patterns on the carpet. He had dreams, you see. Big, beautiful dreams about restaurants and businesses and making it rich. I believed in those dreams so much that I didn't notice when he started gambling away my paychecks. Didn't notice when the dreams became delusions. What happened? We lost everything. The apartment, the car, my grandmother's jewelry that I'd kept after she died. Elena's voice grew smaller. I worked 3 jobs trying to keep us afloat while he chased one get-rich-quick scheme after another. And the whole time, he kept telling me I wasn't supportive enough, wasn't believing hard enough in our future. Through the door, she heard Adrian's sharp intake of breath. The morning I left him, Elena continued, I had exactly $47 to my name and a suitcase full of thrift store clothes. I've been rebuilding ever since, one paycheck at a time. This job, your job, it's the first time in 2 years I've been able to sleep without calculating which bills I can't afford to pay. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the storm's fury. I'm sorry, Adrian said finally, for what he did to you, for what trusting the wrong person cost you. Your turn, Elena whispered. Tell me something real. A long pause. When Adrian spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made Elena's chest ache. My mother died when I was 8. Ovarian cancer, quick and brutal. My father was a brilliant businessman, but a terrible parent. He dealt with grief by drowning himself in work and expecting me to do the same. Elena closed her eyes, imagining a small boy lost in a mansion much like this one. I remember the day of her funeral, Adrian continued, his voice barely audible. I was crying in my black suit that was too big for me, and my father pulled me aside. He said, "Freeman men don't cry, Adrian. Freeman men build empires that make other people cry." I was 8 years old, and those were the last tears I was allowed to shed. "That's horrible," Elena breathed. "It gets worse." Adrian's laugh was bitter. He sent me to boarding school the next month. Said it would make a man out of me. Do you know what it actually did? It taught me that love is conditional, that people will leave you the moment it becomes inconvenient to stay, and that the only thing you can count on is money. Elena pressed her palm against the door, wishing desperately she could touch him, could somehow reach across the years and comfort that grieving boy. "I built my first company at 22, Adrian continued. Made my first million at 25. And every success felt empty, because the only person I wanted to impress was dead, and the only person left didn't know how to love anything except profit margins." "You learned to be alone," Elena said softly. "I learned that alone was safer. People want things from you when you have money, your time, your resources, your soul. And when they've taken what they need, they leave. It's cleaner to keep everyone at arm's length. Is that why you've been alone in this house? Why you drove away the nurses?" Another pause. They all looked at me like a problem to be solved or a paycheck to be earned. None of them. He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. None of them what? None of them touched me like I was worth saving. Elena's breath caught. She remembered that night, the way her hands had moved over his fevered skin, not with clinical detachment, but with genuine care. She'd seen his vulnerability and responded with tenderness instead of judgment. "The night you helped me," Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. "It was the first time in 26 years that someone took care of me without wanting something in return. You didn't know how much money I had, didn't care about what I could do for you. You saw me suffering and you helped." Tears Elena didn't know she'd been holding began sliding down her cheeks. "Adrian, I've spent my whole adult life believing I was unworthy of that kind of care, that the only value I had was what I could buy or build or provide. But when your hands touched mine on that washcloth," his voice broke slightly, "for the first time since I was 8 years old, I felt like maybe I was worth saving just for who I am, not what I have." The storm outside seemed to quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "You are worth saving," Elena whispered fiercely. "Not because of your money or your empire or anything you've built. You're worth saving because you're human, because you feel pain and loneliness and hope just like everyone else." Elena. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "I see you, Adrian. I told you that night, and I meant it. I see the man behind all the walls, and he's beautiful." Through the door, she heard him shift closer, probably pressing against the wood just as she was. "I'm falling for you," he whispered, the words carrying the weight of a confession that could destroy them both. "I know it's impossible. I know it's insane, but I can't stop it." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Then don't stop it." "Elena, I'm falling too," she breathed. "And maybe that's the most real thing either of us has felt in years. Sing to me." Adrian's request came so softly Elena almost missed it over the storm's gentler rumbling. The worst of the weather was passing, but they were still trapped, him behind his electronic lock, her in the hallway that had become their confessional. "What?" Elena's voice carried surprise and something warmer. "You said your mother used to sing to you when you had fevers. Silly songs about birds and flowers." His voice held a vulnerability that made her chest ache. No one's ever sung to me. Not even when I was small." Elena's heart broke a little more for the boy who'd been taught that tears were weakness and comfort was conditional. She cleared her throat softly, suddenly shy. "I'm not very good at it," she warned. "I don't care." Elena thought of her mother's hands cool on her forehead, her voice like honey and sunlight even in the darkest moments of illness. The memory was bittersweet, but for the first time in years, it brought more comfort than pain. She began softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pajarito que cantas, en la roma del amor. Canta para mi niño, que ese duerme sin dolor." Little bird that sings, on the branch of love. Sing for my child, that he may sleep without pain. Her voice grew stronger as the Spanish lullaby flowed through her, each note carrying memories of her mother's arms, her grandmother's kitchen, all the women who'd loved her before the world taught her that love was dangerous. Through the door, she heard Adrian's breathing grow deeper, more relaxed. When she finished the first verse, silence stretched between them, not empty, but full of something precious. "That was beautiful," he whispered. "What does it mean?" Elena translated slowly, her voice soft with memory. "It's about a little bird that sings away all the pain and sadness, so children can sleep peacefully." "Your voice?" Adrian paused, seeming to struggle with words. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Heat bloomed in Elena's cheeks. "My husband used to tell me I sang like a broken radio." "Your husband was an idiot." The simple declaration, said with such quiet conviction, made Elena laugh, really laugh, for the first time in longer than she could remember. The sound echoed in the hallway, bright and genuine. "I like your laugh too," Adrian said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I bet you don't do it often enough." "When exactly am I supposed to laugh?" "While scrubbing toilets. Counting bills I can't pay. Right now. With me. In the middle of a storm, with all our careful plans falling apart." Elena considered this, surprised to realize he was right. Despite everything, the power outage, the locked doors, the impossibility of their situation, she felt lighter than she had in months. Maybe years. "Tell me something happy," she said impulsively. "Something from before everything got complicated." "Happy?" Adrian's voice held wonder, as if she'd asked him to describe unicorns. God, I don't know if I have any happy memories." "Everyone has happy memories. They just get buried sometimes." A long pause. "Then, there was this dog. When I was 5, maybe 6. A golden retriever that belonged to our gardener. My father hated it, said it was undignified for a Freeman estate to have mutts running around." Elena settled more comfortably against the door, sensing a story worth hearing. "But when my mother was still alive, she used to sneak me out to the gardens in the afternoons. The dog, Max, I think his name was, would see me coming and go absolutely insane with joy. Like I was the most important person in the world. You were to him. He'd knock me down and lick my face until I couldn't breathe from laughing. My mother would scold him, but she was laughing too. We'd play fetch for hours, getting grass stains on my clothes that would make my father furious later." Elena could picture it. A small boy with dark hair and serious eyes learning what unconditional love felt like, even if it came from a dog. "What happened to Max?" "My father had him sent away the week after my mother's funeral. Said I needed to focus on important things instead of playing with animals." Adrian's voice grew quiet. "I cried for 3 days. The last time I ever cried, actually." "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "Don't be. You asked for something happy, and it was happy. Those afternoons with Max and my mother. For a little while, I was just a regular kid who got dirty and laughed too loud, and loved a dog who thought I hung the moon." "You still could be," Elena said softly. "That boy is still inside you somewhere." "Is he?" "I've seen him. When your fever broke, and you looked at me like you couldn't believe someone actually cared. When you protected my job, even though it would have been easier to let me go. When you asked me to sing. Elena's voice grew stronger. He's there, Adrian. Just buried under all the armor you had to build to survive. Through the door, she heard him shift closer until she was sure they were both pressed against opposite sides of the same piece of wood, as close as they could be while still being apart. What about you? Adrian asked. Tell me about little Elena. She believed in fairy tales, Elena said without hesitation. She thought love conquered everything, and that good people always won in the end. She was going to be a teacher and marry a prince and live in a house with a garden full of flowers. What happened to her? Life. But maybe. Elena pressed her palm against the door, imagining she could feel his warmth through the wood. Maybe she's still there too. Maybe she's the reason I couldn't walk away when I heard you fall, even though helping you broke every rule. Elena. Her name was soft as a prayer. Yes. When we get out of here. When. Elena agreed, not if. Things will be different. The real world has rules and expectations and... Sure. Elena closed her eyes, holding on to this moment before reality crashed back in. Let's worry about the real world tomorrow. Tonight, it's just us and the storm and all the things we're finally brave enough to say. Tonight, Adrian agreed. Just us. And for the first time in years, both of them felt like that might be enough. The power returned at 5:43 a.m. with a hum that shattered their perfect world. Elena jerked awake against the door, her neck stiff from sleeping on the hardwood floor. Dim morning light filtered through the hallway windows, and the electronic locks throughout the mansion clicked open with mechanical precision. Elena. Adrian's voice was thick with sleep and something else, dread, maybe, at the return of the real world. I'm here. But even as she said it, Elena was scrambling to her feet, panic flooding her system. The power was back. The spell was broken. And Mrs. Holbrook would arrive for the morning shift in less than 2 hours. The door handle turned easily now, and Adrian stepped into the hallway. The sight of him made Elena's breath catch. Rumpled dark hair, day-old stubble, still wearing yesterday's clothes. But his eyes, those dark eyes that had learned to guard secrets, were soft as they found hers. Hi, he said simply. Hi. Elena smoothed her wrinkled uniform, suddenly aware of how she must look after sleeping on the floor. They stood there in the growing light, two people who'd shared their souls in the darkness, now facing the harsh reality of morning. The intimacy that had bloomed between them felt fragile in the daylight, like something that might crumble if they looked at it too directly. I should go, Elena whispered. If anyone sees me here. Elena, wait. Adrian reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Last night, what we said to each other was real, Elena finished. All of it was real. Relief flooded his features. I was afraid you might think it was just the storm, or being trapped, or... It wasn't. Elena stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. What I feel for you isn't going anywhere, just because the lights came back on. Adrian's free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. We'll figure this out. There has to be a way. Well, what do we have here? The voice cut through their moment like ice water. Elena spun around to find Mrs. Holbrook standing at the top of the stairs, her pale eyes taking in every detail. Elena's wrinkled uniform, Adrian's informal clothes, their intertwined hands, the obvious intimacy between them. Elena dropped Adrian's hand like it was on fire, but the damage was already done. Mrs. Holbrook, Adrian said coolly, his voice shifting back to the controlled tone Elena recognized from their first meeting. The power outage caused some complications with the security system. I'm sure it did. Mrs. Holbrook's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Miss Morales, you were supposed to report to the servants' hall during the emergency. Instead, I find you here, in the master wing, looking quite comfortable. She was helping, Adrian began, but Mrs. Holbrook cut him off with a raised hand. Mr. Freeman, with all due respect, I've been managing household stuff for 30 years. I know exactly what this is. Her gaze flicked between them, cataloguing every telltale sign. Miss Morales, you will report to my office immediately. Mr. Freeman, your medication is available in the kitchen safe. The power restored an hour ago. Elena felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Mrs. Holbrook, please, I can explain. There's nothing to explain, the older woman said coldly. You've made your choices quite clear. Adrian stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to getting his way. Mrs. Holbrook, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Mrs. Holbrook snapped, is Miss Morales thinking she could seduce her way to a better life. It's the oldest story in the book, Mr. Freeman. The poor little maid falls for the rich master, thinking she can trade her services for security. The words hit Elena like physical blows. She saw Adrian flinch, saw something cold and familiar slide behind his eyes. The walls going back up, the armor snapping into place. That's not what this is, Elena said desperately. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Mrs. Holbrook's voice dripped with disdain. You saw an opportunity and took it. Used his illness to get close to him. Played on his vulnerability. Very clever, Miss Morales. Very calculated. Stop. Adrian's voice was quiet, but carried enough force to silence both women. That's enough. Elena looked at him hopefully, waiting for him to defend her, to tell Mrs. Holbrook she was wrong. But when Adrian met her eyes, she saw something that made her heart shatter. Doubt. Elena, he said carefully, perhaps we should discuss this privately. The careful distance in his voice, the way he'd suddenly gone formal with her name, told Elena everything she needed to know. Mrs. Holbrook's poison was working. The boy who'd learned that love was conditional, that people always wanted something, was remembering his lessons. Discuss what? Elena asked, hating the way her voice cracked. Whether you believe I'm a gold digger. Whether everything I told you last night was manipulation. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Elena backed away from him, her eyes burning with unshed tears. I can see it in your face. The minute she suggested I was using you, you believed it. Elena, that's not. Adrian reached for her, but she stepped out of his reach. 26 years of people wanting things from you, Elena said, her voice breaking. I should have known I'd never be any different in your eyes. That's not true, Adrian said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Elena's laugh was bitter. The poor maid and the sick millionaire. Of course it had to be about money. What else could someone like me possibly offer someone like you? Mrs. Holbrook watched the exchange with satisfied eyes. Miss Morales, you have 10 minutes to clean out your quarters. Security will escort you from the property. Elena looked at Adrian one last time, memorizing his face, the face she'd learned to love in the darkness. I thought you saw me, she whispered. I thought I saw you, but maybe we were both wrong. She turned and walked away, her spine straight and her head high, even as her heart crumbled to dust in her chest. Behind her, she heard Adrian call her name once, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to see the doubt in his eyes again, couldn't bear to watch him choose his comfortable loneliness over the messy uncertainty of love. The fairy tale was over. It was time to go back to being invisible. Have you ever had someone doubt your intentions when all you were trying to do was love them? Sometimes our past wounds make it hard to trust even the most genuine connections. What do you think Elena should do now? Share your thoughts. I'd love to know if you think love can survive this kind of betrayal. Elena sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, staring at the single suitcase that held everything she owned in the world. 10 minutes, Mrs. Holbrook had said. 10 minutes to erase any trace of her existence from Adrian's life. Her hands shook as she folded her few belongings, muscle memory taking over where her heart couldn't function. The spare uniform she'd never worn. The paperback novel she'd been reading by the light of her phone. The rosary her grandmother had pressed into her hands before she died, whispering prayers for protection and love. Love. The word tasted bitter now. Elena closed her eyes, and despite everything, she could still feel Adrian's fingers intertwined with hers, could still hear his voice in the darkness, saying her name like a prayer. For 12 hours, she'd believed in fairy tales again. She'd believed that love could bridge any gap, heal any wound. But Mrs. Holbrook was right about one thing. Elena was just the maid. And when doubt came knocking, Adrian had opened the door and invited it in like an old friend. A soft knock interrupted her packing. "Miss Morales?" The voice belonged to Maria, one of the kitchen staff. "There's a taxi waiting outside." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. She zipped up her suitcase and took one last look around the small room that had been her sanctuary. On the nightstand sat her final paycheck, enough to cover her rent for exactly 1 month. After that, she'd figure something out. She always did. 3 floors above, Adrian stood in his bedroom, staring at the bathroom where everything had changed. The marble floor was dry now, no trace of the fever sweat and spilled water that had brought them together. No evidence of the moment when 2 broken people had found healing in each other's touch. He'd gotten his medication as soon as the power returned, taking the dose that would keep the fever at bay for another day. His body was healing, growing stronger. So why did he feel like he was dying? "I thought you saw me," Elena's voice echoed in his memory. "I thought I saw you." The doubt that had poisoned his mind in the hallway was fading now, replaced by something worse, clarity. Elena's face when Mrs. Holbrook had accused her of manipulation. The genuine hurt, the disbelief, the way she'd looked at him like he'd driven a knife into her heart. Because he had. Adrian sank into the chair by his window, the same window where he'd watched Elena disappear into his house just days ago. She'd looked so small then, clutching her cleaning supplies like armor. But she'd been braver than he'd ever been, hadn't she? Brave enough to enter his room when he was at his weakest. Brave enough to touch him with gentleness instead of fear. Brave enough to love him despite every reason not to. And how had he repaid that courage? By believing the worst about her the moment someone suggested it. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Holbrook. "Staff situation resolved. Miss Morales has been escorted from the property. New maid starting Monday." Adrian stared at the message, each word like a nail in his coffin. Situation resolved. As if Elena was just a problem to be managed, not the woman who'd sung to him in Spanish and made him remember what it felt like to be human. He thought of her story about her ex-husband, about working 3 jobs while the man she loved gambled away their future, about sleeping in her car and rebuilding her life 1 paycheck at a time, about finally finding stability, only to lose it all because she'd been brave enough to love someone who didn't deserve it. Again, Adrian's hands clenched into fists. He'd become another David, another man who'd taken Elena's love and repaid it with betrayal. The only difference was that David had stolen her money. Adrian had stolen something worse, her faith that she was worthy of being chosen, of being believed, of being loved without conditions. The intercom buzzed. Mrs. Holbrook's voice, efficiently destroying what was left of his heart. "Mr. Freeman? I've prepared the new staff arrangements. Shall we review them? No. The word came out harsher than he'd intended. Sir. Adrian stood up, something crystallizing in his chest. Not the fever this time, but something much more dangerous. Hope, maybe. Or desperation disguised as courage. Mrs. Holbrook, you're fired. Silence. Then, I beg your pardon? You heard me. Clean out your office. I want you gone by tonight. Mr. Freeman, if this is about the maid. Her name is Elena. Adrian's voice cut through the speaker like steel. And yes, this is about Elena. This is about the fact that you looked at a woman who was trying to save my life, and saw only calculation. This is about the fact that you made me doubt the first real thing that's happened to me in 26 years. Sir, I was protecting your interests. My interests? Adrian laughed, the sound empty and bitter. My interests are walking out the front door right now because I was too much of a coward to fight for them. He clicked off the intercom and grabbed his keys from the dresser. His reflection in the mirror showed him a man he barely recognized. Hair disheveled, eyes wild with something that looked dangerously like hope. Outside, he could hear a car engine starting. Elena's taxi, probably. Taking her away from him, back to a world of struggle and uncertainty while he stayed safe in his tower of money and fear. Not this time. Adrian ran for the door, his bare feet slipping on the marble stairs as he took them two at a time. The front hall stretched before him like a mile, and through the tall windows he could see a yellow cab pulling down the circular drive. He threw open the front door and ran into the morning sunlight, calling her name across the manicured gardens that had never seen so much desperate hope. Elena! Elena! The taxi stopped. Through the rear window, he caught a glimpse of dark hair, a pale face turning to look back at him. For a moment, everything hung in the balance. Her choice to stay or go, his choice to fight or retreat, their choice to believe in love or let fear win. Adrian ran toward the car as if his life depended on it. Because it did. Elena's hand froze on the taxi door handle as Adrian's voice cut through the morning air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Wait, she whispered to the driver, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the rear window, she watched Adrian Freeman, billionaire, recluse, the man who'd learned never to trust anyone, running across his perfect lawn in bare feet and yesterday's clothes, calling her name like it was the only word that mattered in the world. He reached the taxi just as Elena stepped out, and for a moment they stood there in the morning sunlight, both of them breathing hard, both of them terrified. I fired Mrs. Holbrook, Adrian said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I fired her, and I'm firing anyone else who thinks they know what's best for me. Because they don't. You do. Elena's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back since the confrontation upstairs. Adrian. No, let me say this. Let me say it all before I lose my nerve. Adrian stepped closer, his dark eyes fixed on her face like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to earth. I've spent my whole life believing that everyone who claimed to care about me had an agenda. My father taught me that. The world taught me that. And for 26 years, it kept me safe and miserable. Elena's suitcase sat forgotten on the gravel between them. But you, Adrian continued, his voice breaking slightly, you saw me at my absolute worst and you didn't run. You didn't calculate what you could get from me or how you could use my weakness against me. You just helped. Because that's who you are, Elena. You're the woman who sings lullabies to grown men who've forgotten what tenderness feels like. You're the woman who risks her job to make sure someone doesn't suffer alone. You doubted me, Elena whispered, the hurt still fresh in her voice. The moment she suggested I was using you, you believed her. Adrian flinched as if she'd struck him. You're right. I did. And I will never forgive myself for that. He took another step closer, close enough to touch if either of them was brave enough. But Elena, I've been conditioned to see manipulation in every kindness, calculation in every caring gesture. When Mrs. Holbrook said those things, it triggered every defense mechanism I've built since I was 8 years old. Elena studied his face, seeing the boy who'd learned that love came with conditions, who'd been taught that tears were weakness and trust was dangerous. I'm not asking you to forget what I did, Adrian continued. I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life proving that I know better now. That I know the difference between someone who wants my money and someone who wants me. And what do I want? Elena asked softly. Adrian's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't know had fallen. You want the man who laughed at stories about a golden retriever named Max. You want the man who asked you to sing because no one ever had before. You want the man who's brave enough to let you see his fevered dreams and vulnerable enough to fall asleep to Spanish lullabies. Elena's breath caught. Yes, I want that man. He's standing right here, Adrian whispered. Scared out of his mind, but here. And he loves you, Elena. He loves your voice and your laugh, and the way you touch people like they're precious. He loves that you see broken things and think, how can I help instead of how can I profit? He loves you so much it terrifies him, because loving you means risking everything he's built to protect himself. Elena reached up to cover his hand with hers, holding it against her face. I love you too. Not your money or your house, or what you can give me. I love the man who remembered being happy with a dog in a garden. I love the man who protected my job, even when he could have destroyed me with a word. I love you, Adrian. Even after what I did. Even after I doubted you. Elena was quiet for a long moment, thinking of all the ways life had taught them both to be afraid, all the scars they carried from loving the wrong people. We're both broken, she said finally. Both afraid of trusting the wrong person again. But maybe that's exactly why we're right for each other. Maybe two people who've learned to be careful can learn to be brave together. Adrian's smile was soft as sunrise. Together, if you'll have me, but not as your maid, Adrian. Not as someone who works for you or depends on you for survival. As your equal. As your partner. Yes, Adrian said without hesitation. Yes to all of it. Yes to partners and equals, and whatever it takes to build something real with you. Elena rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet in the morning light. This kiss was different from the fevered intimacy of that first night. This was a promise, a beginning, a choice they were both making with clear eyes and open hearts. When they broke apart, the taxi driver cleared his throat pointedly. So, are we still going to the bus station, miss? Elena and Adrian looked at each other and started laughing. The kind of laughter that comes after crying, after fear, after choosing love despite every reason not to. Actually, Elena said, picking up her suitcase, I think I'm staying. Good thing, Adrian said, taking the suitcase from her hands. Because I have no idea how to cook, and apparently I need to learn how to live like a regular person who gets grass stains and laughs too loud. I can teach you, Elena said, slipping her hand into his. But fair warning, I come with a very small apartment, student loan debt, and a tendency to sing off-key when I'm happy. Perfect, Adrian said, bringing her hand to his lips to press a soft kiss to her knuckles. I come with trust issues, emotional unavailability, and a mansion I have no idea what to do with. We'll figure it out, Elena said. Together. As they walked back toward the house, toward their future, the morning sun painted everything golden. The mansion that would become a home, the gardens where they would plant new memories, and two people who had learned that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin not with fairy tale perfection, but with two broken souls brave enough to heal each other. Behind them, the taxi pulled away, taking with it the last remnants of Elena's old life. Ahead of them lay something neither had dared to dream of. A love built on seeing and being seen, on choosing each other not once but every day, on the radical faith that two people can be worth more together than they ever were apart. In his pocket, Adrian's phone buzzed with messages from board members and business associates who would never understand why he'd thrown away 30 years of careful isolation for a woman who sang lullabies and believed in fairy tales. But as Elena's laughter rang out across the morning air, bright and genuine and completely, wonderfully free, Adrian knew he'd never made a better investment in his life.